But I think to go back to my grandfather's story, um, he grew up in Yuma, Arizona, down here on the border of California and Arizona, and on the Mexican border. And his family lived on a little farm, and eventually they lost their farm during the Great Depression. And so what they went on is something called the circuit, and it's all these little regions and microclimates all across our big state of California, where there's fruits and vegetables that are coming in and out of season, right? In and out of harvest, and that require all these different jobs to be done. And so these people, these farm workers, right? These migrant farm workers, a majority of whom are undocumented farm workers now, right? Which is another big issue that we need to start talking about today. Fortunately, we just had healthcare reform passed. I don't know about you guys if you have healthcare, but I'm kind of excited about that. So again, that's why it's important when we get out there and we talk about these issues that are affecting all of us. And we start to, work on solving some of these problems at hand. And knowing that we never have a definite answer, we don't know the truth with the capital T, but that we're working towards a solution. And we're working towards greater clarity, and, again, greater understanding, so we know how to live in harmony with one another. And so my grandfather and their family grew up living that life of, migrant farm workers going up and down California. And eventually, they settled for, short periods of time, but my grandfather was in and out of schools. And growing up that life, he experienced things like child labor. And he saw the backbreaking work that the farm workers were doing with the short handle hoe. The backbreaking work that deformed, so many mothers' backs and so many fathers' backs. And the pesticides that were being sprayed on top of the farm workers as they were there picking those fruits and vegetables. Not to mention the fact that those pesticides, these poisons, right? These poisons that kill bugs, that they also leave a residue that eventually, gets brought into our own homes and gets brought into our own central nervous systems, right? And so one of the things that my grandfather did, and I didn't even realize, and it's pretty awesome, was for a while there, they were ahead of the EPA, right? The Environmental Protection Agency. It was supposed to be looking out for all of our best interests. The farm workers movement was a little bit ahead of them in saying that we need to ban DDT. Have some of you guys heard about this poison DDT? Yeah? In some of your biology and ecology courses, right? And so you learn about this little poison, this pesticide, how when they, sprayed it on the lowest level of what they sometimes call the food chain, right? The food web chain. Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. Correct me here. I forget this term. But, you'll learn about as you go forward in ecology. They showed as they sprayed this poison out there, eventually as, the give and take process of life worked its way and, the bigger animals ate the smaller animals and whatnot. Those poisons made its way up the food chain and eventually started to make it into the human nervous system. And so, again, that was one of those things that my grandfather, had some awareness to, and understanding that there's great trade-offs in all the actions we make. So, the more we can be aware of what we're putting on our fruits and vegetables and what we're putting into our bodies, the better we could, make those choices in our daily lives. And so my grandfather worked hard, to make sure that the farm workers weren't, being showered in pesticides. And again, like I was saying, the farm workers were paid so poorly that, sometimes they just lived right here on the edges of the fields in their cars and then, in little shacks. And so it was horrible. They lived in this bubble of pesticides. And in the small little town where my mom grew up and their family was born and raised, and where I was just at yesterday as I was driving up here, yesterday afternoon, last night. In the 80s at one point, because they were spraying so many pesticides, the cancer rate shot up. I think it was like 700%, like 1,000% in this little town with nothing but grape fields all around it and almond trees all around it. And so again, all those pesticides that were being sprayed all around the fields on all the people who lived in these small little towns, it began to take its toll. And so that's what my grandfather, worked hard against, was the poor pay, the horrible conditions, the malnutrition, because these people, again, who picked all these fruits and vegetables didn't even have enough to go and buy them for their own family. And, and it's just really sad, because going back to the beginnings of our, civilizations, the farmers and the farm workers were always, some of the most respected people because of what they brought to the community and the bounty that they were able to share with so many. And so again, I think that's why we should all be grateful and respectful for the farm workers. And there's a simple way to show our gratefulness and our appreciation for the farm workers, and it's by, taking the time to consider what are the type of companies that we're supporting, right? How many of you are registered to vote? No, not yet. How many of you are 18? So how come you're not registered to vote? If you don't mind me asking. If you can be registered to vote, how come you're not registered to vote? You know. And for those of you who are going to be turning 18 soon, you know, I think that's something that you really go out and you do right away. Is you register to vote. You make sure that you start participating, and you let people know what kind of society you want to see. But even more important than that, my grandfather taught millions of Americans that you don't even need to be registered to vote. Where you put your dollars is a vote. Because at the end of the day, those companies, those little special entities that you support or choose not to support, when they gather your funds, they go right back down to Sacramento and they lobby for their special interest anyways, right? We learned about this in our government class. So, shouldn't we even consider that every dollar we spend in some way is also like a vote, right? And so, again, that's why it's important for you guys to consider, the things that you bring into your life. What is that saying about you? And, what do you tell yourself inside? And how do you reconcile that with the world outside around you? And so, again, it goes back to I think that simple teaching that Gandhi taught my grandfather and Martin Luther King Jr. You need to be the change that you want to see in the world. And so, that's what we're here to talk about, is how individual people working together can do great acts. My grandfather, like I said, living this life of migrant farm workers up and down, went in and out of a bunch of schools, and eventually in the 8th grade, this isn't a marriage picture, by the way. A lot of kids ask me, and I'm like, no, he's not marrying at like 13. This is First Communion. And then in the 8th grade, my grandfather had to quit school because he had to go and support his family. And so, even though he quit school in the 8th grade to go support his family, I think it's important to remind everybody that later on in his life, my grandfather was very well read and throughout his whole life. This is a picture of his office as he left it on the day he passed away in 1993. And you could only begin to see here that he basically had bookshelves from floor to ceiling, kind of like we see here in the library. And he read everything from autobiographies to history to literature to accounting, business management, gardening, arts and crafts. And he had a whole section dedicated to Gandhi and to Martin Luther King Jr., who we revered and who we learned so much from. And again, he was one of these people who understood the importance of being a lifelong learner and remembering that learning doesn't just take place from Monday through Friday from 7:30, or what time you guys wake up at? 8 o'clock in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon. Every day, every moment of your life, is an opportunity for you guys to, again, wake up and to be aware and to really pay attention, right? Like all of our parents tell us, right? Pay attention, right? The key word there is pay. You have to give your time, you have to give your energy, give a little bit of your focus, right? Give a little bit of yourself in asking a question, right? Not being afraid to raise your hand if you don't understand. And that's when you'll be able to, start learning some valuable lessons and, really contribute to something that's worthwhile. And so, that's why it's important that we don't forget, that every day, every moment is always an opportunity to learn something new, to grow.